In the midst of the days of awe, we look back at the lessons learned in the last year and take a closer look at cheshbon hanefesh, or accounting of the soul.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracy,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracy Guy Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable.
Happy 5783, Tracy.
Yeah, you too, April.
As I just said when we first started our call before we started recording, it's nice to see you on the other side of the new year, and nice to be here on the other side of the new year, on the other side of this new year with you, friend. I'm feeling, for me anyway, this Jewish New Year has been very much welcomed. And I rarely feel that way. And I'm really grateful for all the different lessons that 5782 had for me, a number of which I asked for, but it seems to be a theme in my life. They were not for the faint of heart. And I think maybe it's true of other folks in general, and just certain people may be more or less ready to really face them. And I was more ready, but still had to struggle with it, but was very aware. And I think for other people, they're going through similar things, but because either for different reasons, either they don't have the education or support or whatever, they might be like numbing out or just like not going straight into the into the stretch. Like, for me, I was like, I could do shadow comforts or other things and ignore these growing pains that are surfacing. But it was clear to me, like, the only way out was through. And I'm appreciating the second day of the new year because it genuinely feels like, as I want to say fruitful, as generative is also not the right word, as productive. No, what's the right word for Shemitah year? As transformative or as wisdom producing, facilitating as the Shemitah year was for me. I'm happy to be here. And the marking of the new year gives me an energy boost of like, yes, this does feel new. And we have new things happening. We've been doing new things, but also having something external and profound, also saying that too, like a new sheet has, like we're into a new chapter, we're on a new page. I'm happy to have somewhat of a clean slate. How are you coming into this, listener? Like, how are you feeling coming into 5782? Is 83? Is anything I'm saying resonating? I bet you, like, I'm also curious to hear how Tracy is feeling on the other side of this Jewish year divide.
Thanks, April. Yeah, it's 5782 definitely, as you say, had a lot of lessons. A lot of lessons in that year.
That was perfectly said. That sigh, that's like the perfect thing.
I'm just thinking about all the things that like never could have predicted as I entered 5782, like when we recorded last year and I talked about like less efforting in the Shemitah year and trying to just rest and see what fallow, what fallow looks like.
We did discuss that.
Like. We did. And when I sat in this exact chair and said, I'm just curious to see and feel what fallow looks like, I had no idea what was in store for me.
Same.
Which I guess makes sense, right? None of us can see the future.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. And, this time, these days of awe, such a contemplative time.
Yes.
I think, we make it so. And, I'm remembering when I was in undergrad, I was I don't remember what year, somewhere in the middle, sophomore, junior. And I was taking this course. I was a religion major, and I was taking this course on Islam. And we were assigned to like write a book on a surah, which is a chapter of the Quran. And so I'd read it, obviously only in English, since I don't read Arabic. And it was like really confusing to me at the time. It was all, Moses was traveling with Joshua, and they had their lunch in a basket, and then they come to the meeting of the two seas, and like their lunch, which was like a fish, came back to life. And I was just like a little bit dumbfounded. And then like I kept like cogitating on it, and I was like, oh, the two seas are like the two worlds. And I went and told my professor, I was like, oh, I think the two seas are the two worlds. And I was really, really proud of myself. And my professor was like, the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is like a really special time. And so that was probably like helped you come to that insight. That's a great insight. And I was a little put out by that answer. Like I felt like he was suggesting that it wasn't my brilliance that was interpreting this text, but rather, some external special thing. Well, thank you for the masa, but actually I'm looking back on this now 20 some years later, and I have such a different perspective on it. Like at the time it felt like an insult. Like he didn't think that I was capable without external
definitely
help.
A bit of wind out of sails.
But now it's sort of like, oh, it's that time. Like, what insight that was out of reach before will now be within reach, because I am in proximity to where the two seas meet. Like it feels different, even with the content of that particular surah that I was studying those 20 years ago. I feel like I'm now, these 20 years later, maybe a little bit more ready for the insight that he was trying to share with me after I shared my insight about the surah. I had no intention of going. That was like a way rabbit hole.
I love it. And it actually brings up something that I wasn't planning to talk about, and I'm not fully prepared for it, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. I want to lean more. You've been sort of the champion of talking about this. And as we talked about, it looks differently for both of us, similarly and differently, but I want to lean more into imperfection. And I've been working on this while I was doing my TikTok page too, of just like, but I love what you're saying. And it reminded me of something that Rabbi Jill Hammer said yesterday during the services. And there were multiple things happening within me in the service, different posts coming through in the chat with like the prayers and songs. And I think that was around the time after I'd shared some beautiful prose that a friend of mine recently wrote. And I asked her if I could share them during the Rosh Hashanah, the Kohenet Rosh Hashanah service. And she gave me permission. And I was doing some follow-up with people in the chat who were like, that was amazing. It made me cry. Can you share where can I find this poem? And it was very poetic, and I actually broke it down like a poem for my reading of it, but it was just like a paragraph that I think she just thought it was like something she wrote pre Rosh Hashanah, and it was gorgeous. And so I was also doing a little bit of I was a little distracted, but I find during these services often it's kind of like when you're in a really juicy conversation or something, and different people say things during the service that really stir you. And then I can kind of, me, I can go a little bit go off into that world. I'm like, wait, that was something else really brilliant, but I missed the context. It was one of those kinds of moments. And she said, and I'm going to kind of backfill that often Rosh Hashanah is described as, the birthday of the world. But she said that in our literature, and this is the part where I missed the exact thing. This is what I would guess, but I don't remember if this is what she said. It was recorded, so I'd have to go back and listen to the recording to confirm that the translation of the actual Hebrew word that's used, that is often translated as birthday, which is such a Kohenet feminist thing, is actually means conception.
Mm.
That this is the day that the world was conceived. And I just think that that's really juicy in a lot of ways. I think it speaks to the power of some of what we're talking about in the self-coaching framework we've taught in Grounded and Growing. And in terms of being between two worlds and something coming into being, I also just like from a generative evolutionary perspective, I just really love processes. And as someone who spent a lot of time building different departments and launching different initiatives and all of the generative work we do together as a team within Joyous Justice and creating different initiatives, conception is a very different stage than birth and launching. And so it seemed a little bit aligned, and I like the idea or the thought, even if it's not widely known, that part of what we are celebrating on Rosh Hashanah, as it aligns with how much I am into and love and think that a core part of a just future that we are moving toward is radical imagination, is watering the seeds that haven't yet bloomed of what we want. I really loved that reframe of thinking about of just what that allows for or encourages. Just the simple reframe that Rosh Hashanah is the day that the world was conceived. And then there's also like a whole side thing, which we don't need to get into, or we can a little bit and just be indulgent about. I think we both are still pretty clear that abortion makes sense when it is necessary, and like I just realized there's that whole thread. But in terms of ideas, for us as people, that there's just a lot of different things. We don't have to get into all of them, but I just think that is really ripe and like just a juicy, rich space to think about all kinds of things, like the ways in which once something is conceived, what protection does it need, and that it's real. It hasn't fully come into what it will be. It is not a human, but it is the beginnings of whatever that thing will be, and that it is sacred and worthy of care and mindful treatment, and
what it receives during that gestation period actually also helps determine how healthy it will be once it fully manifests.
Yes.
Which I think is really a powerful like extension of the metaphor, right?
Yes, that's a perfect. There's so many that one could do, and that is a really amazing one because so many people think, oh, it's not that thing yet, but it actually watering the seeds, which is, as you know, something I love to say in the context of our programs. We haven't talked about it so much, but I want to talk about it more. That it's just a little thing. But if you want it to become a mighty oak, at some point, it's just going to start out as a sprout. And there's got to be a way for us to hold the vision of where it's going, of the world that will become. And also, it's going to be on a journey there. And we can keep watering it and protecting it until it comes fully into fruition.
Yeah.
Oh, so another reason why I'm feeling sweet about this new year is we had 4 really. We had a busy week last week.
We really did.
And I saw it coming, but then because I'd engaged in the Assan's intense family ritual the week before, right. I didn't have full perspective because being home and in my familiar environment was not as intense as this intensive, but it was I was out on my bed most of the weekend.
It was a lot. I use the color like a mustardy goldenrod color for like when we facilitate for those blocks on the calendar. It was like the whole week was just yellow.
And so my whole week was green. Right. And the nice thing about it was, Tracy, which was a really sweet way to end the year and a really good transition into this year, is every call was wonderful. It took a lot. So I don't think we're looking to make a habit of
not that many in a week
of facilitating that many fresh conversations in a week. But the coaching that happened in that space and the earnest and sincere commitment and curiosity and
vulnerability,
open-heartedness. Exactly. That's where I was just going to go. And open-heartedness, vulnerability that people brought onto the calls, and us meeting it with compassion and strength and clarity. Like it was really wonderful. You know, we had our shift call on Sunday, and then 2 of our Elul conversations on Tuesday and Thursday, and in the middle, sandwiched between, we had the Siyum, the closing class for our second cohort of Grounded and Grow. It was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
And but it was fun. It affirmed for me how much, not that I needed it, but it's still good. You know, the more affirmation, the better. How much I love working with you. And Sarah too. We wanted to share a couple of the insights that came out from our Elul conversation process. One, it was sweet as we shared to do it. Thank you to everyone who gave donations. Some folks came to the Elul calls, others didn't and just donated. Also, I don't know if we have a task there potentially of if we need to send out recordings, which might still be nice to do during the days of awe. But I think some folks, like, it was just, I felt really well thought of by people in our community, and it was just, I can't quite put it into words, and some of it I think might be just energetic for me, or energetic reading. But I felt, as I was seeing some of the notifications, it felt like love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it was $18 or $162, you know, at times when we receive things, it feels like obviously they're great, but it really felt like the sense that I had is that folks read our email and either wanted to come and or looked at the schedule and knew they couldn't, and I just really feel like they were like, I want them to know that I see them and that I appreciate them and this event, and I want to give. And so I just want to, if you were one of those folks who did that, I want to say a few thank yous. And one of them is a thank you to you especially. We have our email replies that we sent to folks, but I also just wanted to say how much we appreciate that support, and thank you very much. And then we had a number of people on each of the calls. And as you know, Tracy, I don't think I've shared this publicly. I really like at times when we repeat a process and give a couple, like we did that this round with Grounded and Growing, where we offered 2 class times. And as a facilitator and teacher, I love teaching the same material twice to different audiences, because I find that the conversations are similar in some ways, but also really take on a life of their own. And as someone, and I think this goes for you too, Tracy, who really loves and appreciates this material, it's really interesting to see how it comes to life in different ways. And so I also just want to share, and that was because of the wonderful, open-hearted, courageous souls and committed souls who joined us on these calls and contributed to making them very special for all of the attendees and also for us. We did this as a thank you and a gift, and as often said, it ended up feeling very much like a gift for me and for our team and for you, Tracy. And that was not why I went into it. I really just wanted to express love and hold space for our people. And it was really sweet to be received in that, for people to show up with an aligned energy around that. And it ended up nourishing my heart in anticipated and unanticipated ways.
Yeah. Before the event, we asked we invited folks to spend some time reflecting on some prompts that we shared. I was just going to briefly share some of those prompts to help kind of frame. So we asked,
great idea.
In light of all that's changed and also what hasn't, how have you shifted? what are one or two ways that you have or are changed or changing? And how do you feel about that change? We asked, what has you feeling stuck? Or said another way, what challenges take up more brain space than you'd like? First thought, best thought, there are no wrong answers. And then we asked, we noted that we believe in the power of appreciative inquiry, and asked what's something that you do, think, or feel that you want more of. So those were the key questions that we asked folks to reflect on as a Elul cheshbon hanefesh, accounting of the soul, kind of a exercise that elicited, as you noted to the participants, like not as clear a consensus as other times you've done qualitative analysis like this. And also, I feel like there were a few kind of patterns
and themes that arose that were not universal. It wasn't like when I wrote my thesis about Jews of color, where there weren't many things, but every single person, like 98% of the participants said some variation of, I'd like to hear the stories of other Jews of color. I'd like to connect with other Jews. There was that there were some threads that were near unanimous amidst a wide range of things. There were some core anchors that nearly everyone, in a few cases, had similar. Unfortunately, nearly every person had a range of. Everyone had positive experiences, but everyone had consistently across an alarming range of negative experiences that they'd had. Whereas in this case, it was relatively all over the map, but even within that, there were some patterns and clusters of
sort of
dynamics,
constellations of ideas.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add logistically before we dive into that, Tracy, that I think we did it in our last episode and we'll do it in this episode. If you hear these questions and they feel generative to you, we aren't having another Elul conversation, but if you'd like to see the questions, we can include the link to the Google form that we used for these Elul and now Tishrei reflections. I think that they can still be helpful during these days of awe. If you hear these and you're like, I kind of missed this before, but I would like to reflect on these questions. If you want to submit them, you can do it anonymously or you can include your email and have it sent to you. Either way is fine. Most of the people who filled it out for us, which I noted and we noted in our reflections, more than half of the people didn't include their email addresses, which I mostly thought of as a positive thing, that people really heard our invitation to share open-heartedly and preferred to keep their identity strictly anonymous, which is part of what we were offering in the container. And so I'm glad that folks, despite having some things that felt private and sensitive, that they were willing to still trust us to share them. And if that's helpful for you, we'll include the link to all of the Elul information so that if you want to make a donation and or want to review these different questions and access them and either fill out the form or just use it as a launching pad to engage in some of your own reflection during this time, that is an option. So now that I said touch base about that logistical piece, Tracy, you were moving us into some of the core bits that we were really excited to talk about some of the patterns that we saw.
I don't think that we should rehash what we did in the actual Elul conversations, but I thought I might just sort of top line and then
because I think giving a little bit of an overview it just matches, it aligns with the theme that people were being very thoughtful, and so I think it's great that a number of the themes that came through all had the theme of people really genuinely diving deep and.
So some of the trends that we saw in the answers, even though they were not universal, as you say, some of the interesting trends were that there were a number of people who either said they were feeling more grounded now or were seeking out mechanisms to help them feel more grounded, which makes total sense in both, actually. Because another one of the trends was several people talked about how they're much more comfortable with being alone. They're much more comfortable with solitude now than they used to be, which also makes sense given that, as I said the way that I phrased it in our call, that we're now in the third season of our dystopian apocalypse TV show that we're all living in. And the apocalypse for us has been that we have to be afraid of being in proximity to others. And so becoming more comfortable with solitude makes total sense as we're learning to live with the effects of the global pandemic. And the inverse was also true, though, right? Which we noted that not everyone, many people expressed a desire. The thing they want more of in 5783 is community and connection. I was really struck, April, by the way that folks described the connection they were looking for. They wanted more one-to-one connection. They wanted more visioning in Chavruta or in, sacred partnership. They wanted real connection.
And transformative.
And like that.
And to me, that actually is a perfect. And to me, that actually makes a lot of sense, because if one is more comfortable with their own company, you genuinely want something that's higher quality. You want connection, but it's not necessarily filling a similar void that now is filled by, and we might be like extrapolating a bit, but I think some of these core principles apply with when you actually enjoy your own company. It's not that we don't need company anymore, but our desire for the quality can rise. Right.
Like we don't just want to be entertained,
to fill space or pass time. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And I was really, really struck by that. It deeply resonated as I was, reading, and it also deeply resonated with our participants, right? Because we invited them to share with us as things kind of rang true or resonated one way or another with them. And that was the outcome that generated the most kind of, heart reactions among our Zoom participants.
Yeah, especially on that second call, people,
it was almost every single person.
Community, really, they were like, oof, that really, like, people were really staying with us and listening with different pieces, participating a little bit. But when that theme came up, that crew was really like, yes, that is truth. Want to hear more about that. Want to discuss that. And we talked about it just briefly on the calls a little bit, and I invited you to share this insight that I'm very excited for you to share on the podcast, Tracy. But there was also an interesting little thing that did come up pretty consistently, which is that in response to our third question, in which we asked people to take a moment to reflect and then share what are positive things or what are things that they appreciate in their life they would like to continue or they'd like more of in their year, that people pretty consistently, almost seemingly like misunderstood the question and chose to or just out of habit energy focused in on things that they want to change or lack and what they want to fill that lack. And it's very interesting because I was asking that question as a way to kind of generally positively contradict that natural human pattern that many people have. And particularly during a season where themes of judgment and repentance, mind you, through a Jewish lens, but in the context of our Jewish community being immersed in the context of Christian hegemony, even though our theology is very different in a number of ways, there's still some of that fear that can kind of come into the experience. And I wanted us to ask a question, and we'd already asked people, like, we asked it in a different way, but essentially, like, what's keeping them up at night type of question.
Right. We asked them how they were stuck. I mean, we actually used the word stuck, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we asked that. So we had touched upon that. And so in this question, this was our next steps question. And I actually think it's really, and I think that's how I'm kind of remembering. I think that's sort of my intention as we were crafting that question, that like, what's like, what are asking questions more about how reflecting back and thinking about present time and where do you want to, where are you struggling? And also too, thinking about next steps that are possible and that we have to take. What can we be thinking about? What for you personally, to each person, are things that were really helpful that you want to carry. And most folks, with the exception of one person, so one person, and I feel like maybe there was one other, but like one person wrote visioning in Hebruta. So there were a couple people who did say, this is something that I've really enjoyed and that I would like more of, but most other folks didn't, and focused on either in their lives or within themselves a sense of deficit and wanting to correct, which is really different than what we were asking. And so I think I want to just in a moment pretty quickly dive into your insight, Tracy, because I loved it and it landed well for our participants on both calls. But this is like a theme that I see coming up. There's a broader theme, and this is not as fun, so I don't want to focus on it, but this is a trend that I notice that happens in our community. And it's helpful to see because I've been working on it in the context of justice, power, and belonging, particularly as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. And I'm just realizing now that it's helpful to see that it's not just that subject where this challenge that I see our community having, which I think is also, again, also affects other people too, but I think that there are specific cultural and sociological elements that this is live for our people often, that it's difficult at times for our people to move from strength to strength, to recognize and honor and celebrate progress or strengths, and weave that into and simultaneously say, and there are bits here and bobs and different things that are either missing or problematic, and I want to take ownership of the strength and or the positive attributes in my experience and use that to buoy me in service of moving toward what I want. That this is something that I don't think everyone has to do it, but in my experience as someone who has historically often lacked resources, this strategy has been vital and has made the difference from my perspective of succeeding or not, or the level of struggle I have with making forward movement despite the odds. And so to me, it's just a vital strategy that I see our community consistently struggling with. And you have a really seasonally timely metaphor that I think is so helpful. And I'd love for you to share it, Tracy.
Thanks, April. Yeah, so this is the time when we're invited to do cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul. And I think when we hear that, and the way that we practice it usually is sort of, a very a critical eye. What did I do wrong in the past year that I need to repair?
What needs fixing
or fix? Mm-hmm. What harm did I do that I need to repair? Which I think actually is an important thing to do. And what do I need to fix, especially about myself? How do I need to fix me in the coming year? And
also a relational, and also have certain things been done to me where I would like repair to peoples or communities I'm a part of, where I would like there to be some healing or repair around that, right? So both like looking at my own bit, like there's the parts where we are invited to, I'm just adding on that there's also the added layer of both specifically us doing self-reflection and then also engaging in that self-reflection and noticing the places where we've been hurt and perhaps where we might be longing to receive an apology or to have, which is what we talked about in our last episode.
Right. The thing that I'm realizing this year is I think about the way we translate cheshbon hanefesh, and I have to admit to you all that I did not go do any etymological research on cheshbon. But in English, accounting is not only looking at deficit. It's not only looking at liabilities. If you're looking at an accounting ledger, it has both the assets and the liabilities, the credits and the debits. And if you only look at one side of the ledger, you do not have a complete picture of whatever organization or individual or account. You do not have a complete picture of the account.
Yes,
and so
you do not. Say it, Tracy.
And so I'm really thinking about that other side of the ledger, not just what I've done wrong, which I do have to look at that side of the ledger, but also what I've done right that I want to keep doing. And that's an invitation that I think is more agitational for folks than I maybe anticipated it would be. But I think that's a good thing. I think that means that's the medicine that is needed, when it is a little agitational in that way.
And hearing it this like third or fourth time, because we talked about it before each of the classes, then we talked about it before the classes, and then talked about it on the classes. Part of what I love about this. So one, is this landing well with you, beloved listener? Because it's just like, right. It's like, yes, right. We need to be balanced. And what I love about this is that I find when we invite people to appreciate something themselves at the end of our classes, or when I'm talking about this with my clients, it's almost like in their minds, they are so accustomed to focusing on the negative that like what I love about what you shared is that it indicates balance. And it's interesting to me that people have such strong habit energy around solely focusing on the liabilities. When you ask them not to write the scales, not to only focus on the positive, to focus on just something and or one thing or a milestone. So for instance, when I was working with organizations around the racial justice journeys who are still very much on the journey, these are like 5 to 20 year arcs. And I wanted folks to just pause and celebrate some milestones. There was just this huge aversion to this. And so as you were saying this, I'm just getting even more passionate about this, because it occurs to me that the orientation that people have to it, which just like there's a summary here that it's on the edge of my tongue, but it's hard for me to do both at the same time. It's like, it's so unbalanced that just the prospect of answering a single question that is in the direction of, and it's not even necessarily about you, it's just about something in your life. So in some ways, a simple way of talking about it is this speaks to me in a way that I'd never thought of before about the value of why, as you know, and as the listeners may know, I really prefer the word appreciation, or like this frame of like what wonderful things happened, but it speaks to why gratitude is so helpful. And it's not just because appreciation or gratitude are great in and of themselves. In part, it's because things are, in a number of ways, are so out of balance that just doing that practice, and it's potent in and of itself, just starts to help people overall without realizing it get to a more rational, balanced place of having a more holistic understanding of what is happening in their world. And for me, this is important, not just because it's nice, but because it's pragmatic. Because when we are able to notice what our assets are and leverage them and appreciate them and savor them and feel emotions of gratitude around them, that is a completely different process than just being like, I need to scale this mountain with nothing alone. Like, it's helpful to notice, I have strong legs and I have good navigation. Like it is helpful. It is helpful. So there's a lot to say about this. But I think what I love about this example or metaphor that you brought is that it really concretizes it in a way and helps make very clear that just from a point of accuracy, when you understand accounting, you need to be accounting for both of those pieces. But our conditioning has been so strong in a variety of different ways in the context of oppression for both people who have been targeted and also people who have also experienced dehumanization who are in the non-target positions, around the culture of perfectionism and production and what is your inherent source of value. And often in our society, it's placed around work product.
Well, and so
I love that it serves as multiple forms of medicine in multiple different ways, but that communicates balance and the value and just the rationality.
I think that's exactly it. The rationality that you're pointing to is really like
key.
Yeah,
this is not fluff. This is facts. It's
and because
facts.
there's such a stigma around like bragging. There's such a stigma around that we shouldn't like
Around
get
many
too big for our
different,
britches or whatever.
and isn't that fascinating? And that is so deeply in service of maintaining oppression and disempowerment for everyone.
So, but when you say, I mean, there is nothing more sort of rational and emotionless than accounting, at least not in my mind. And so there, you know, to put it in those terms, which is, you know, accounting of the soul is the way that the phrase is translated. And so if we're sort of saying like, no, we're taking the emotion out of it. It's not about humility at this point, right? Because even our Musar masters who teach us about anava, about humility, it's humility is not complete self-abnegation.
Right.
You know, it's that midpoint between arrogance and self-abnegation. And so so that it fits nicely. And I think you're pointing to the rationality is really significant and useful.
It just makes it more clear, because what that example, it's profoundly in alignment with what I'm asking people to do. But because of the cultural climate, the perception is so skewed. But people get accounting. And people understand, as you just said, that has balance. And that is what I want for our people and for all people, is to be able to see clearly and to address the challenges that need to be addressed, and also notice what is going well. Because often a number of those pieces in different ways, if for no other reason than just knowing it, can give us more confidence. But at times, a number of those things can be deeply in service or can help us experience some additional ease or empowerment around facing what's difficult to face. And so I'm really excited that we shared this. I hope that it's helpful for you, beloved listener and friend. And feel free to send us a message in all the different ways that you can. If, in addition to what we've said, you also see, well, one, about anything, if you have any thoughts about anything we talked about in this episode, but also two specifically, because I think this example that Tracy shared is helpful in so many ways. And so if you had an epiphany that aligns or doesn't fully align with some of the examples we gave, please feel free to share, because I think that there are a lot of different wonderful, helpful implications to this teaching. And I'd love to have more of them elevated. So I hope that this episode and other different bits and bobs and experiences in your life in the coming days contribute to positive momentum and self-aware and balanced analysis, as self and global analysis, as we enter into 5783. And thank you for joining us for another episode. And as you know, a pivot in the podcast is coming. Precisely when it is, I'm not sure. We have a number of different pieces we need to figure out. But we are so grateful that you continue to join us on this journey and share episodes that resonate with friends. We've grown, and part of that has to do with our ongoing marketing, and part of it has to do with the fact that you've also shared our episodes. So as I mentioned before, I'm just feeling really deep appreciation right now for you and for Tracy and for Sarah and for a number of the partners with whom we have worked and continue to work or will work. And I'm excited for what this year holds. Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.